Greetings. Today we'll be starting with the carving of the maxillary first premolar, permanent maxillary first premolar, and I'll be carving the right side. So as usual, as I've always said, measure the length of the crown that you have to measure. It's about 8.5. I've taken about more than 8.5, marked it, and I've given the outline of the crown throughout onto the mesial, the lingual, as well as the distal. Now, once we have done that, we will mark the center of the block. So the center of the block from buccal all the way onto the occlusal. I'm just doing it up to there, as well as from the distal all the way onto the occlusal, going to the mesial. Now, the reason why I've marked this point is because when we talk of the buccal surface, we say the mesial slope is longer than the distal slope. So this is the mesial slope. It should be longer than the distal slope. So what happens is that it goes beyond the central line. So this is the mesial slope and this is the distal slope. The outline of the mesial and the distal slope. Now, one thing we should know in the maxillary first premolar is that when we talk of this tooth, when we talk of the mesial marginal ridge which will come here and the distal marginal ridge that will come here, we say that the mesial marginal ridge is at a lower level than the distal marginal ridge. So distal marginal ridge here is at a higher level. This is the only posterior tooth that the distal marginal ridge is at a higher level. So there is more angulation to the mesial slope here. So once I've marked it, I'll remove this straight down. So when I'm removing it straight down, I can place it down onto the tray and cut it straight down. Mesial slope. And the distal slope. So both the slopes have been cut, mesial and the distal. So with this you can notice that the distal marginal ridge here is at a higher level than the mesial marginal ridge which is here. It's gone to a little lower level. Alright. Now the next thing I need to do is to get the buccal ridge. The buccal ridge. So the buccal, when I'm getting the buccal ridge, it's a two-plane reduction. And just like we did in the canine, it's a two-plane reduction, but we're bringing the tip of the buccal cusp. Now if this is the center, it won't reach the center. It will be in line with the buccal root. So the buccal root will be somewhere here, so I have to bring the tip of the buccal cusp somewhere here, midway between the central point and the present position. So two-plane reduction. Now when I'm doing this two-plane reduction, I should make sure that the distal, this angle should be more buccally placed than the mesial angle. So the mesio-buccal line angle should be more towards the lingual as compared to the disto-buccal line angle. So here two-plane reduction, again taking it inwards. Taking it inwards from this side also. Refine this. So you make sure when you look at the block from here, you see that this is the mesial, this is the mesial surface. So the mesio-incisal, the mesio-buccal line angle here is more towards the lingual as compared to this. So what has to be, I have to get this more buccal and this more lingual. So what I can do is I can further take this a little more lingual. This is remaining buccal. Okay, so this point is over. So this angle is more towards the mesio-buccal, is more towards the lingual as compared to this. Now the next thing I need to do is to make the occlusal outline. For the occlusal outline, I know the angle formed between the mesio-buccal this mesiobuccal cuspal slope and the mesial marginal ridge is a 90-degree angle. So I'll keep it straight, just reducing the size. I'll keep it straight, cut it straight down like this. Alright, so this is a straight angle here, there's a 90-degree angle, while on the distal side it's an acute angle. So I'll give it an angulation slightly acute. So I'm going to make it into an acute angle here on the distal side. Take it just straight down to the cervical. On the distal side, you can see that it is an acute angle here, while on the mesial side, it is a 90-degree angle. Now, the next thing I need to do is to get the lingual outline. Now, for the lingual outline, it is a smooth convex outline, semicircular outline, okay, bringing the tip of the lingual cusp more towards the mesial. So it's going to be a smooth outline. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove a bit from this angle here. This is from the distolingual angle, and very slightly from the mesiolingual angle, very slightly, and then I'm going to just smoothen it till it gets a semicircular outline. So it has a sort of a semicircular outline that sometimes we see on some of the prints on outfits. You see a mango print. So it's almost like the shape of a mango print here, where it has a sort of a semicircular outline bringing the tip of the lingual cusp more towards the mesial. Now, when you look from the mesial or from the distal side, you should be able to see that the buccal cusp and the lingual cusp, they are at two different levels. The lingual cusp is about a millimeter shorter than the buccal cusp. Now, to attain this, what I will do now itself is I will slope from the tip of the buccal, I will slope it slightly towards the lingual. I'll give a slope towards the lingual, reducing the height of the lingual cusp about a millimeter. So the height of the lingual cusp should be about a millimeter shorter than the buccal cusp. You can further reduce it if you feel that it is not that short. Alright, so this is roughly the outline of your occlusal surface. Now this is all gross cutting. So this is all gross cutting. Now the next step I would like to do is to carve the occlusal surface. So the two cusps, you have a central groove separating the two cusps. So a central groove will separate the buccal cusp from the lingual cusp. So to get this central groove that runs in the center, dividing the cusp and then extending onto the mesial marginal ridge as the mesial marginal developmental groove, I draw this outline just to give me a reference. Now I need to carve the cuspal forms. Now the cusp I will start carving by placing the tip of the lacrons should be facing the marginal ridge. Place the lacrons flat on the surface and just go inwards. Similarly, on this other side, turn your lacrons to face the other side. Tip of the lacrons facing the marginal ridge, and then you go inwards. Leave space for your marginal ridge. Just take it inwards. Same thing, you can repeat again if you want to go a little deeper. So you can see I'm getting a two-plane reduction. At the same time, it is sloping. It is sloping towards the central groove, creating a sort of a sulcus there. Similarly, I turn it round onto the lingual surface, place it on the tip of the cusp and go inwards. Place it on the tip of the cusp. The tip of the lacrons facing towards the marginal ridge. Don't do it in the opposite direction. Some students do it this way, which makes the whole thing go wrong. It has to face, the tip of the lacron should face the marginal ridge. Just take it inwards. So the two plane reduction is done to some extent. I'm just leaving it at this phase now. I can deepen it later. Okay, so this is my distal marginal ridge, which I'll give a little shape to it. And this is my mesial marginal ridge here. Now I'll leave it at this phase and I'll go for the root carving. Now when I'm making, before I start with the root carving, I can make the triangular fossa. So the distal triangular fossa, just place your lacrons like this here. So the tip is facing into the distal pit, and then you just take it round like this so that you get a triangular shape out here. So triangular fossa is made on the distal side. Similarly, I'll have to make on the mesial side. Remove all the loose wax. Now the mesial triangular fossa, similarly place it on the surface of the cusp slope, and then the tip of the lacrons is within the developmental pit, and just go round like that. So you have the mesial triangular fossa. Alright, so with that we have done roughly the gross carving of that occlusal surface. Now what I need to do is to go for the length of the root now. Now the length of the root is about 14 millimeters. So you measure again on your scale with your divider. You measure 14 millimeters. Now I'm going to keep it a little less than 14 because the tip, I'm not carving exactly the tip. So it's around somewhere here. I can make it up to 14, no problem. And then keep it a little longer here. All the way, take it round. So that's roughly the length of my root. Now, as per the shape of the crown that you can see now, the shape of the crown, there's slight shape where the wax is jutting out here. So, as per the shape of the crown, I'll take it all the way down to the point that I have marked as the root tip. Now, when we talk of the tip of the buccal cusp, it is in line with the tip of the buccal root. So this should be my buccal root here. Here I should have my bifurcation. This should be my lingual root here. So my bifurcation should be somewhere here. Now the bifurcation is half the length of the root from the mesial aspect. So what I'll do, I'll start making the bifurcation. So I'll take my lacrons where the center is, and I'll just take it from where the block ends here, where the root end is supposed to be. I'll keep taking it down or up, whichever way you feel comfortable. Same thing on the other side, distal side. But we know the bifurcation on the distal side is at a higher level than it's seen on the mesial side. So just remove the wax slightly. Just straight, don't push too much, otherwise it'll break the wax block. You can keep continuing this until a thin gap of light is seen passing through like an eye of a needle. So, on both on the mesial and the distal, you just deepen it till you meet at the center. Now you can see, don't push the lacrons too much into the wax, it may break. So if you look carefully, you can see like an eye of a needle, light passing through. Now I'll start carving my roots. Now my buccal root, okay, from the bifurcation, I'm just opening up on the distal and slightly on the mesial. So I'm opening up my bifurcation. Now the buccal root, when I look at the outline from the crown aspect, the buccal root comes converging towards the apex, okay, more from the middle third. So the tip of the buccal root will be mostly well centered. So I will converge the apical portion slightly from the middle third onwards. And then I can start opening up the bifurcation a little. I'll give a shape to the buccal root. I'll take it in from the buccal side because it needs to be in line with the tip of the buccal cusp. So I need to take this in a little, reduce the dimension a little, make it more convex. I'll leave it at this stage. Similarly, the lingual root, I need to converge. Now, the lingual root is much more narrow mesiodistally than the buccal root. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to converge first towards the lingual root. Because from the lingual side, you can see part of the buccal, the mesial and distal surfaces of the buccal root also. So I've converged the block towards the lingual. Now the lingual tip of the lingual cusp will not go inwards because actually the lingual cusp is in line with the lingual surface of the tooth, of the root. So I'm not going to take the lingual root in too much. I'm just smoothing it on this surface, converging it also to the lingual side. And I'm going to open up the bifurcation here on the distal. Similarly, I'll open up the bifurcation both buccally and lingually on the mesial. Now the next step, I'll just leave it at this phase. I'm going to carve the cervical outline of the tooth. So on the buccal surface, now it's about, the length should be 8.5. So I'll mark around 8.5 here. 1 second. Now this is about 8.5. So this is where my cervical line is going to be. So this is the point of your crest of curvature of your cervical line on the buccal. So the outline will be convex, buccally, Now from this point you take the outline all the way throughout, and from this outline on the mesial side it dips in about 2.5 millimeters. Sorry, it dips in about a millimeter. So you can measure about a millimeter, mark it onto the mesial side and just outline that here. While as on the distal side again, it's a straight line. So it's going as a straight line from mesial to distal, and this is the tip of this is the convex outline of the palatal outline. So now I've roughly made an outline. Now I place my lacrons on the surface and then remove more from the mesial and distal surfaces labially as per the outline. So that's my cervical outline. Now coming to my mesial it dips in here. So as you've noticed, I've left the whole thing bulky in the beginning because I'm waiting for this cervical carving to reduce the dimension. So I'll remove from here also. And from the distal, which is relatively a straight line, all the way to the lingual, which I'm not going to remove much. Okay, so I've got my cervical outline throughout. Now when we talk of the mesial side, we say that below the cervical line it is concave. There is a concavity here. So for that concavity I'll remove a little more excess from the cervical. So now this is a rough outline that I have. Now you can see that the root is bulky, sticking out on either sides. I have to reduce that bulk. So just take your lacrons, just follow the outline straight down. So I've removed it straight down here. Similarly on the distal side, making it more convex on the labial. Now whenever we are reducing the root, start from the labial surface and go onto the mesial. Extend it all the way to the lingual. Start from the labial, go to the distal and converge it towards the lingual. Now what we need to do is, now you see that the cervical portion is sort of irregular and sticking out from the root. So it's sticking out further from the root. So what I need to do is place my lacrons onto the labial surface and then smoothen it this way. So with that, what happens, both on each angle I'm going smoothing it, making it more convex here. So what happens is the crest of curvature is appearing here. So the crest of curvature, the area of maximum convexity, will come, and in the premolars it is either at the junction of the middle and the cervical third, or it is in the cervical third. So the crest of curvature, I've got the crest of curvature here onto the buccal surface. So you can see the crest of curvature now from the buccal surface. Now on the palatal surface, the crest of curvature is in the middle of the middle third. So what I have to do is now smoothen my cervical here. As well as from this portion also, so that the crest of curvature comes within the middle of the middle third. So now when you look at the mesial side, this is the mesial, what is happening here on the mesial. I have removed more from the root portion. Now why I have done that is because I want to make this area concave. So to make it concave, I place my lacrons on the crown portion and in a curved manner remove it from this side. So automatically what happens, I get a sort of a concave outline here. And then this is the crest of curvature coming here, which should be in the middle of the middle third. So I have to correct that position. Now on the distal side, they say the outline is more straight or convex, but here I need to remove a little more of wax from the distal side of the root so that I get that convergence. It has to converge also. The tooth has to converge towards the cervical. So once I've done that, I place my lacrons flat on the surface and then remove it like this. So automatically you get a convergence on the distal side. So the crown is converging towards the cervical. Now here again you can refine your cervical carving further. Throughout. Now I'm going to redefine my bifurcation by opening it up on the mesial. Smoothen it all the way to the distal so that you get a proper outline. So here what is on the mesial, I'm just smoothing those angles so it becomes a little rounder. So outlines of the root are not angulated in any way. They have a nice round outline. Similarly on the distal, just opening it up a little. At the same time keeping it at a much lower level. Its bifurcation is not at the middle of the root as what is seen on the mesial. So now I'm just doing the finishing to get all the anatomical details in the carving. So when you look at the occlusal surface, you see that this is a semicircular outline. Semicircular outline when you're talking from the distal aspect. So if this is distal marginal ridge, there is a semicircular outline bringing the tip of the lingual cusp more towards the mesial. Now this triangular ridge joins this buccal triangular ridge joins the lingual or the palatal triangular ridge to form a transverse ridge. Now I'm just going to finish the carving and I'll show you the final finished product. So once I finish it, then I will show you the details that needs to be carved onto the mesial side of the block. Now on the occlusal aspect, this is the central groove. The central groove runs from the distal pit, that is in the distal triangular fossa, to the mesial pit, which is in the mesial triangular fossa, and it continues onto the lingual surface. It continues on the mesial surface, just lingual to the contact area. So it will have to cross over here. So I'm just making the crossing over. So it cuts across the marginal ridge. So it cuts across the mesial marginal ridge and indents the surface for a short distance. So very short distance it indents on the surface. Now I'm just going to refine this again, just showing that it dips in on this surface as well as it cuts the occlusal surface. Just remove all the loose wax from the surface. So this is the mesial marginal developmental groove. Now you can see that it is crossing the mesial marginal ridge and getting indented as it's crossing it. Now just below this you have a concavity that is located just above the cervical line. Now this concavity or this depression is known as the canine fossa. So with the reverse end of the Lacron's carver, I am just removing a slight concavity above the cervical line, and I'll extend it beyond the cervical line onto the root up to the bifurcation. So on the mesial side up to the bifurcation, we have a developmental groove extending, depression extending. Remove all the loose wax and just smoothen it as per the outline of the root also. Just slightly smoothen it, but make it prominent up to the bifurcation. Polish the surface. Remove all the loose wax from the cervical line. So this developmental depression that you see on the crown portion, it's known as the canine fossa, because this is where the prominence of the canine will fit. So adjacent canine, the prominence of it will fit, the distal prominence will fit into this fossa. Now sometimes the maxillary first premolar comes with a single root. Even if it has a single root, on the mesial side you see the developmental depression extending on the root. Alright, so this is the buccal view of the carved tooth. You can see the mesial outline where there is a concavity just below the cervical line, which is convex, the concavity, the convex portion, which is the crest of curvature on the mesial, and on the distal it's relatively straight here, okay, but you have it converging towards the cervical with the convexity here, which is the contact area. So you notice that the contact area almost at the same level. You see the mesial slope, it's longer than the distal slope, and this area is at a higher level than on the distal, so that the marginal ridge, the mesial marginal ridge, is at a more higher level than the distal marginal ridge. So distal marginal ridge is more towards the occlusal than the mesial marginal ridge. Now if we go to the mesial surface, we see that the root has two roots. So you have the buccal root and the palatal root with a bifurcation. Now the bifurcation extends up to half the length of the root on the mesial side, and from this bifurcation you can see there is a developmental depression extending all the way, and it's coming onto the crown here. So on the crown, this developmental depression that you see just above the cervical line is known as the canine fossa. It's also known as the mesial developmental depression. Now on the mesial side, you can see that the tip of the mesial cusp, the buccal cusp, is in line with the tip of the mesiobuccal root, while as the lingual cusp, the tip of the lingual cusp, is in line with the lingual surface of the tooth, of the lingual root. Now if you see the two cusps, when you compare the two cusps, the buccal cusp is a millimeter taller or longer than the lingual cusp, and you have the mesial marginal ridge which has been indented. You can see that indentation by a groove that is known as the mesial marginal developmental groove, that is extending slightly lingually on this surface and ends immediately onto the mesial surface of the tooth. Now this groove extends onto the occlusal surface as the central groove that runs from the mesial pit to the distal pit. Now before we come to this occlusal surface, I will go to the distal surface. Now when you compare the distal surface with the mesial surface, you do not see any groove crossing the distal marginal ridge, and you can see that the bifurcation is not half the length of the root as you've seen on the mesial side. So you can finish this even further. Some surface is not so smooth, you can finish your root finish a little more better, okay. Now when you come to the lingual side, you can see that both the crown and the root is converging towards the lingual, and when you see that both the crown and the root converging towards the lingual, so you see a part of the mesial surface and the distal surface of both crown and the root because it's converging. Now when we look at the lingual cusp, it is spheroidal. It is spheroidal in shape. You can see nice and spheroidal in shape, and the tip of the lingual cusp, you can make it a little more sharper. I've made it not so sharp, but you can make it a little more sharper. Now another thing that is a difference on the distal side is the cervical line. Cervical line is relatively straight here on the distal as compared to the mesial, where it dips in about 1 millimeter. Now when we come to the occlusal, when we look at the occlusal, it is roughly hexagonal, 6 sides hexagonal, and if you look at the angle here, this is on the mesial, so the angle formed between the buccal surface and the mesial surface, this mesiobuccal angle here, it is at 90 degrees, while as the distobuccal angle here, this is acute angle. It's an acute angle. You can see the surface is going slanting this way. Now if you look at the buccal cusp, okay, it has a mesial slope. It has a mesial slope and a distal slope. You can see that the mesial slope and the distal slope are almost parallel to one another, and they're going in a buccal direction from mesial to distal. So the distobuccal slope is more buccally placed than the mesiobuccal slope, cuspal slope. Now when I look at the other surfaces, when I look at this distal surface, From the distal, this acute angle, it goes in a smooth semicircular pattern all the way to the mesial surface. So the lingual cusp is more towards the mesial than the buccal cusp. So the lingual cusp is more, or the palatal cusp is more towards the distal. The buccal cusp, more towards the mesial, while as the buccal cusp is more towards the distal. Now, if I look at this, I can see there is a triangular ridge. This is the buccal triangular ridge. This is the lingual triangular ridge. They meet in the central groove. Now, the central groove is seen to run from the distal. This is the distal surface. So, from the distal pit, it runs all the way to the mesial pit. And it is joined within the triangular fossas by a mesiobuccal groove. This is a mesiobuccal groove and a distobuccal groove. So these are the grooves that run and join these grooves, the central groove in the mesial triangular fossa and the distal triangular fossa. Now, as we said earlier, this extends, the central groove extends and cuts across the surface. So here you can see it's slightly indenting this way. So the marginal ridge is cut across by the central groove, which is known as the mesial marginal developmental groove. So with this, I hope you have understood the carving and learnt the anatomy of this tooth in the same sequence. Thank you.